No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspectives, this is Revenge of the Birds. Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. I'm your host, Jess Root, and with the big game coming up on Sunday Night Football against the Cincinnati Bengals, with them coming to town, a game that was originally set for a regular, Sunday afternoon. It has been flexed by NBC as they chose to take this matchup and feature it on their Sunday Night Football broadcast. As I like to do, and it's been actually a few weeks since I've been able to get a preview podcast up. But tonight, recording on a Friday night, we'll get this by the time you're listening to it. Might be Saturday, maybe Sunday morning before or afternoon before the game. But I have from CincyJungle.com, our fantastic SB Nation Cincinnati Bengals site, a man who has been on the guest of the show, so who's already a friend of the show, Scott Bantel from CincyJungle.com. Scott, how you doing tonight?
Hey, Jess, how's it going? I guess, not much storylines going on with this game between these two teams, I suppose.
Not at all. And the biggest storyline, obviously, is the Carson Palmer one, but he's not saying much because I guess, in all fairness, in the middle of a playoff race, that's really not what, he wants to talk about, I'm sure. And that really is a more appropriate thing. I know they've gotten some out of Mike Brown, but just to get this out of the way, what is it? We had you on preseason last year or something like that. What right. Is the sting of Carson's departure? Is that gone yet?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it really ever lasted that long, simply because, well, I say amongst smart Bengals fans it didn't last that long because smart Bengals fans realized that his exit allowed the Bengals to pick up Andy Dalton. And while Dalton certainly has his detractors locally, you can't argue with the results. The guy's been with the team 4 years, and he's gotten to the playoffs 4 times. It's something the franchise has never seen. So, it was Palmer's departure that got them Dalton and a couple other picks as well. So, I think all in all, I think it worked out well both for Palmer and for the Bengals. And as a longtime Bengals fan, it's hard to hold a grudge against a guy that wants to get out from a franchise that no longer is that way, but in the past was a difficult franchise to work for. So it's hard to begrudge him for that. And in fact, I actually root for him. I like seeing him do well out there in Arizona.
Well, and me personally, I've always been on the record with the way how the NFL works. I'm pro player. The way the NFL treats these players, contract money-wise, they just basically chew it up and spin it. And it's good for the game, but in a sport that is as physical and probably the most physically demanding, the most dangerous of all the professional sports, the NFL players, for the richest sport of all, enjoy the least amount of benefits out of all the professional sports that there are with their contracts. Just basically, they can be dumped on their fanny at any particular point in time. Out of all of this, it was an interesting perspective. It was a local afternoon drive time host out in Cincinnati was on our drive time local sports station out here in Phoenix, and he chose to Eggerman or something like that, and he chose to look at it this way, that actually Palmer's exit sort of changed things. It was a catalyst for change for the Bengals, and led to the franchise perhaps doing things a little different. Obviously, it got them, more picks. It got them Andy Dalton, Adrian Green. But it sort of changed how they handled things, which ultimately was good for the franchise. Could we say that perhaps that might be the case? Now, I know one of the things that's really been the benefit of Palmer leaving, and no, you didn't have quite the talent at quarterback for a bit, and we had a young guy growing into the position. But you had a guy who performed pretty well at really cheap, which allows you to put all sorts of weapons around him, salary cap-wise.
Right, and I think, Mo Eggers, the local radio guy that was probably on there, and I agree with him to that point. Prior to Palmer leaving, the 2010 season was his last year here, and that was when they had Chad Ochocinco and T.O. on the same team. And
get your popcorn, I've heard, guys, get your popcorn.
Right, exactly. And I've heard Palmer talk recently about, the fact that the Cardinals don't have any diva receivers, etc. And I think that was really pointed at probably Chad and T.O. I think that last year, the offense game put up some numbers, but I think it took its toll on Palmer. And I think that's where he decided that he didn't want any more. The franchise was known for bringing in guys that were difficult, either on or off the field. Chris Henry comes to mind, another receiver, and then with Chad and T.O. So I think he had to put up with a lot of receivers here that, probably didn't sit that well with him. So I do agree that his forced departure did force the owners of the Bengals to make some change in who they draft and who they bring in. And, like I said, I think Palmer ended up in a better situation, and I think the Bengals did as well.
Well, good. So we can move on from that, since the story between these two teams this weekend is far greater, far more significant than what happened, 4 years ago. So let's talk about this game. Just how good have the Bengals been, and how satisfying a season has it been for Bengals fans?
Well, I think most people that just watched on Monday night probably would be a little shocked to hear me say that they've been very good. They certainly weren't on Monday night, but that was kind of the aberration. This season they have been extremely good. And I was looking at the two teams, and it's almost scary how similar they are.
Yes.
I would say that both of these teams are the most well-balanced team in their conference, and I think they're the top two in the entire league as far as balance goes, from a standpoint of offense, both the run game and pass game, defense, run and pass defense. I mean, they really do mirror each other, and that's why I think it'll be an entertaining matchup. I think it will be pretty high scoring, but I think it will be a good game. I'm really looking forward to this one.
And you look at the two things. Now, the one thing, if you look on at least on a national level, it doesn't seem to – the Bengals, as good as they've been, sort of don't move the national meter at all. It's not really moving the dial much, basically because of the Bengals there was still an element of the Bungles there, and it's almost unfair, but because of the continued first-round exits, fair or unfair, is there a sentiment that, even in Cincinnati, that it's still wait and see because they want to see a win in the playoffs at least?
Oh, it's definitely a wait and see. I mean, it's odd. This is a stretch in this franchise history of success that they've never experienced. 4 straight playoff appearances, 5 in the last 6 years. You're talking about a franchise that had only been in the playoffs back-to-back years once before Andy Dalton arrived, and yet the fans, like you said, they do take a wait and see approach. The team's almost in a lose-lose situation in the regular season, in that there's nothing that they can do in the regular season to really get the fans excited, because they could have gone 16-0 and the fans would have simply said, look, until you win the playoffs, we're not really getting too excited. So they've almost, they're almost a victim of their success of getting to the playoffs and then losing in the first round. I think many franchises would be very happy to have gotten to the playoffs the last 4 years, even if it meant their first round exit. So as frustrating as that's been, I mean, I can't complain too much about making the playoffs last 4 years. It's much better rooting for this team than it was back in the 90s when, prior to the season, we all had hopes of the playoffs, and then 2 weeks in, we realized that those hopes were unrealistic.
Definitely. So we've got two teams now. Now the Cardinals, across the board, it's one of these. Well, I think I knew it, but it wasn't until last week I was looking at the team's game release, and I'm looking some of the rankings, that the Cardinals are superbly balanced across the board. They are a top 10 scoring team in the league, number 2. They are so offensively and defensively, they are number 2 in scoring, number 1 in yards. They're number 4 in passing yards per game. They are number 8 in rushing yards per game. So they've got a top 10 offense in every category that you look. So yards, the passing game, the running game, and points. And then on the defensive side, they are also a top 10 team across the board. They are, not true anymore. They are number 11 in points allowed. Entering last week, they were a top 10 in every category. So they were top 10 in points allowed, top 10 in yards allowed, top 10 in rushing yards allowed, top 10 in passing yards. But now they're top 11. Cincinnati's just outside, so they're top 13 in all those categories. Number 1 scoring defense, number 5 scoring offense. So what is it that, if you had to describe, what do the Bengals do well and what don't they do as well? How could you describe Cincinnati?
Well, I mean, on the offensive side of the ball, it's certainly, at this point in the season, it's the passing game that's the strength, which is a little bit of a surprise. I would say Dalton's year thus far has been surprising, even to Dalton supporters locally. He really has improved. I mean, just watching him behind the line of scrimmage, he looks more comfortable than he has in the past. He's making better decisions when... And, in the past, he's thrown a lot of interceptions because he tried to force the ball to A.J. Green. And he now has the weapons around him where he no longer has to force the ball. If Green's not open, he goes elsewhere. So on the offense, it's the passing game. It really, coming into the season, the run game was thought to be what was going to be their strength. And that it's been okay, but it really hasn't gotten going, especially Jeremy Hill. On the defensive side of the ball, they have a very good secondary, but I would say their strength is their defensive line, especially the fact that they rotate 7 to 8 guys along that line throughout the game, and it allows those guys to stay fresh. So you always have defensive linemen on the field that are fresh, and that really helps. Their strength on the defense is definitely along the defensive line. Weakness-wise, it's the linebacker position is still their weakness. It's gotten better with the return of Vontaze Burfict, but it's still by far and away their weakest position on either side of the ball. I think teams that have good pass-catching tight ends and good pass-catching running backs can certainly take advantage of the Bengals if they can get a one-on-one matchup against their linebackers. And that, Andre Ellington coming out of the backfield, I think, is a big advantage for the Cardinals, and one they'll probably look to take advantage of during this game.
So looking at injury-wise, and this is one of the things that when we exchanged questions earlier week, you don't necessarily know until later in the week. So it appears that the Cardinals will be down a couple important offensive players, and Cincinnati will be down a couple of defensive players, with Adam Jones appearing to be doubtful for the game, as is Michael Johnson. What does that do to the Cincinnati defense?
Those are big. I saw that today, and Adam Jones, I think he's 32 now, but he's playing the best football of his career, both from a cornerback position and in the punt return game. That really hurts the Bengals from a punt return standpoint. They'll replace him with Brandon Tate, who is a run-of-the-mill punt return. I mean, he's nothing that the Cardinals are going to worry about. Actually, Bengals fans will probably worry about him more than the Cardinals will. But Jones has been their best defensive back, and they do have 3 first-round corners besides Jones, so they're not going to be hurting there. But anytime you're down your top cornerback, that's going to that's going to make a difference. Now with Michael Johnson, I don't know they use a ton from the pass rush. They have a couple pass rushers they can bring in for him, but where he's really strong is in the run game, and they, like I said, they got a couple guys. They got a 6'9" guy, Margus Hunt. He's been a little disappointing thus far, but a huge drop. But it's enough that Johnson's absence is a concern to the Bengals, and it's a concern for me coming into this game, certainly.
I was looking at the Pro Football Focus preview that we got. Adam Jones graded high grades for the season, but Drake Kirkpatrick not so much. What does the eye test tell us? Obviously, the Pro Football Focus grade is quite low. What's been the eye test on Kirkpatrick this year?
Yeah, I was kind of shocked to see those grades on him. There's been a couple communication breakdowns that seemed to happen early in the year that always seemed to be on his side of the field. I don't know if it was him that was the communication error or the safety. And unfortunately, that's the thing with those Pro Football Focus grades is, they're graded on what they're graded on what they see. They're not quite sure whose responsibility it was. That being said, coming into the season, he was being talked about as the best cornerback on the team and looking great in the preseason. And I just haven't seen it thus far. He's been okay. He's a long, lanky guy. He's not your typical shutdown cornerback, but I think he'll be a solid pro. But I'm very comfortable with Adam Jones on the one side. With Drake Kirkpatrick, I'm always a little bit uneasy. I'm never quite sure. He may take one back for a pick six, but then he may also just bite a double move and let the guy go by him. So I think the Cardinals would definitely at least test him. That's for sure. And testing is something that they're definitely comfortable with. As last week against Richard Sherman, they threw at him 8 different times and beat him. The 5 catches, a touchdown, and he was flagged a couple of times for some penalties as well. So if there's one thing the Cardinals aren't afraid to do, it's to go after guys, especially when they feel they have a favorable matchup or at least an even matchup. In the passing game, Michael Floyd did really well. Now, Floyd is a big question mark for the game, and John Brown. I feel comfortable with the Cardinals' offense as long as you got Fitz and one of those two. John Brown is 100%. He's still hurt. His hamstring is hurting him when he runs. Floyd, if he can run, will be out there on the field, but neither one of them is going to be 100%. So it'll make that matchup a little bit better. A matchup I'm hoping that people are a little bit more excited about is that of Patrick Peterson, who's having his finest season in coverage this year. Really has kind of locked down everybody that he is matched up against. Just having a great year, and teams are avoiding him. They're giving him the, you saw a few years ago, the Darrelle Revis treatment. They just wouldn't throw to his side of the field, and they're really kind of doing that. And then you bring A.J. Green. Now, he's obviously not been the dominant A.J. Green that he has been at some point during the season, past couple of weeks. But how do you see this matchup playing out? Obviously, the two players happen to have an extreme amount of respect for one another. AJ's called Patrick the best corner in the league, the best guy he's had to face up against. Patrick feels the same way against AJ. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I'd have Peterson ranked up there as either the top or top 2 as far as cornerbacks go. Green is a great receiver. The one thing about Green is oftentimes when he matches up against these big-time corners, he seems to disappear. And I don't know if it's a matter of the game plan where the Bengals simply just go elsewhere and kind of avoid that top cornerback, or if it's just that, he doesn't do well against the top corners in the league. But, this year, with the other weapons that they have, I wouldn't be surprised if they target guys like Tyler Eifert and Marvin Jones more and really pick and choose when they go Peterson's way. That would not shock me at all. The Bengals have their number 2 and 3 receivers and their tight ends are both good enough to take advantage of other matchups. And that's the big difference this year with Dalton is because of that, he's not forcing it to Green. So if Green is not getting open or if Peterson's doing a good shutting him down, I think they'll just avoid him for the most part and go more towards Eifert and Jones.
And that's not a bad thing. If you look at now, Gerard Powers on the other side of the field, very, very capable, been a starter basically his entire career. Last year was the only time when he wasn't technically a starter, and he had perhaps one of his best years playing inside at the slot. He's physical. He does make plays, but he's been burnt a few times. So Marvin Jones, that's a matchup you might see play out well. But, if it ends up being like it has been before, it might be just a quiet matchup with, I don't know, if, at least from my perspective, you see a matchup, okay, AJ gets 4 catches for, 30 yards, and that's great for us. And if you can take out the AJ Green, now granted they've got the other, that sort of thing with the Cardinals, you could take out, you take out John Brown, or you take out Michael Floyd, or you take out Fitzgerald, and the yards are going to come elsewhere since both teams move the ball really well. So looking at this game then, what is this game? Now, in part, you wouldn't think Cardinals-Bengals in the middle of the year would be a marquee matchup. And you would almost expect NBC to go somewhat, is there an NFC East matchup that would be better? But you look at the slate, this really is the marquee matchup of the weekend. What is the buzz? What is the feel around Cincinnati for this game? And how big it is, how important it is? Or is it getting that sort of buzz?
Yeah, most definitely. And twofold is one, in my opinion, this is the best team in the NFC and the second best team in the AFC. So you're talking about a matchup that could potentially, see you could potentially see down the road in the Super Bowl.
I wouldn't complain about that at all. I'd gladly. If that meant to, I wouldn't care who we're facing, but we could do this again in February. I'd be happy with that.
Absolutely, so would I. So beyond, you've obviously got the other aspect of the, Carson Palmer, Jermaine Gresham, I guess Frosty Rucker too, but there really wasn't any controversy with him leaving. But so you kind of have a couple angles there that I think has really piqued the interest of the fans. Not to mention, you've got a fan base that. I've said this often about the Bengals fans. They're a fickle bunch, and they jump on and off that bandwagon pretty quick. And especially on Monday night when they played poorly against what I think is a pretty weak Texans team, certainly a less talented Texans team than the Bengals. I think a lot of fans kind of came down a couple pegs on the Bengals, and I really think the Bengals need this game. Really to kind of regain the confidence of their own fan base, actually.
Now, a couple of interesting stats. Bruce Arians and the Cardinals against basically all the other divisions in the NFL is something crazy. I think it was like 28-5 or 21-5 over the last 2.5 seasons. Really have dominated everywhere outside of their own division. This year, they're on track to hopefully make that better in the division. But also, I was told the other night when I was a guest on the Inside the Jungle show that Andy Dalton has an equally odd stat where against teams he has not previously faced, he's almost unbeaten. Which one seems to be more of an aberration, or what seems to be more of an actual trend that you can look at as you can say, yeah, this actually makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, the Dalton, I've seen that before. There's a guy on our site that writes about that a bunch with the common opponents, uncommon opponents, the difference in his record and stats against uncommon opponents. It's a pretty significant difference, but I chalk it up mainly to the fact that, those common opponents, the AFC North, I think, is the toughest division in football, and it's the only division with 2 Super Bowl winning quarterbacks. And he's been going up since he came in as a rookie. A lot of his common opponents are the Steelers twice a year and the Ravens when they were good twice a year, and that's a big result of the difference in those numbers. So I would say that stat is a little bit of an aberration. He's been much more successful recently against teams like the Steelers and Ravens. I think he's won the last 3 or 4 against the Ravens, and they beat the Steelers so far this year. So I think that common uncommon stat on Dalton is kind of an aberration.
All right. Coming with this game then, what is it that you're looking for most out of this game, out of both teams? What is it that you're going to sit down and hope to see?
I'm really I know it would sound good to say you'd like to see your team, being, for me, the Bengals, blow them out. But I would actually like to see a highly entertaining game. I would kind of like to see a high-scoring game, a shootout. That would be entertaining to me. I'd like to see the Bengals redeem themselves on the national stage after laying what was an embarrassing egg on Monday night. I'd like to see them come out and at least look like the team that we had seen the first 8 weeks of the year, because certainly that is not what they showed Monday night against the Texans.
So how much of this Andy Dalton in primetime games, or the Bengals in primetime games, is media fabrication or media embellishment, and how much is it a legitimate concern about when the big lights come on? And it seems that, a perfect case in point is just this Monday night game. How much is there to that, and how much is it just that's the feeling we all get because that's what we see?
Well, the perception around here is certainly that it rings true. You talk to any fan around here, anytime you're in the office and you hear fans talking, certainly it's the fans buy into it, and the stats show that there actually is a trend there. I think he's 4-8 in prime time, or I'm not sure if that includes the playoff games too, but it's not a good stat, that's for sure. I think it's a little bit of both. I think there is I think he does get uncomfortable when things start going bad and he's in that limelight. But I think another thing is just the fact that generally when you're playing primetime games or in the playoffs, you're playing an equally good. Right,
Yes.
Exactly. So, the first couple years of his career, especially in the playoffs, I wouldn't say they were expected to win any of those games. So I think he's done better recently. I know a lot of people thought he didn't play well Monday night. I thought he actually played fine. You saw a couple of drops from Tyler Eifert, which were very uncharacteristic. I think 3 drops coming into the game, and he had 3 in that game alone, and a missed route. So I mean, he was really his guys kind of let him down there in that game, but he's looked different this year. He looked fine on Thursday night against the Browns. I know it's the Browns, but that's the Browns team that destroyed them the year prior on Thursday night. So I would say there's a little bit to it. It still concerns me when we talk about this game being in Sunday night. I'd be much more comfortable if they would have left it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I think Cardinals fans are probably a lot happier that it got moved to the late game. So I think that's one thing I'll look for is I do want to see them, even if they don't win, look good in the primetime game so they can start getting that monkey off their back.
All right, we'll do a couple more things. That's something I like to ask pretty much all my guests on here. We'll talk about matchups, and we'll talk about kind of a fill in the blank. If you're looking at the matchups, you mentioned a little bit so far, but if there were a matchup that you think, hey, this is definitely in Cincinnati's favor, and where's the matchup that you're least excited about?
The matchup that I think is in the Bengals' favor is as it is almost every week, is Tyler Eifert. I don't know who on the Cardinals is going to cover him. I know Matthew Honey Badger is a great player, but there's a significant size difference. If they get him matched up on him, you're talking about a 6'5", 6'6" tight end
against 5'9".
Against 5'9". So just from a physical standpoint, that's probably a matchup that favors the Bengals. Matchup that concerns me. Let's see. The Bengals center, Russell Bodine, has had a rough year, and I'm not as familiar with the Cardinals' defense as I am their offense, but I know it's good, and so anyone matched up on their center is a concern to me. So I am concerned about that pressure up the middle because, as we saw last week with the Texans got plenty of pressure on Dalton, and that just it kills the run game, it kills the passing game. So if the Bengals can't protect up the middle, that's a bad thing.
All right. and fill in the blank. The Bengals now. I obviously the Bengals will win if they score more points, and they will lose if the Cardinals score more points. But let's go with something a little bit. Just the Bengals will win if fill in the blank, and they will lose if fill in the blank.
I would say they win if Jeremy Hill has 100 yards. Jeremy Hill hasn't got going at all this year. He led the league in the last 9 weeks of the season last year in yards and I believe touchdowns. And so far this year, I don't think he's gotten above 60 in a game. He's actually been very ineffective. So if they're able to get him going, I think the Bengals win. The Bengals lose if they can't get to Palmer. I think if Palmer has time in the pocket back there, I like the Bengals secondary, but the Cardinals got good receivers and Palmer's still a heck of a quarterback. If they can't get pressure on him, I think he will put up just too many points for the Bengals to catch him.
And in terms of predictions, this is a game I normally like making predictions for games. This one I have no idea about because both teams are a little bit banged up. I'm really, really high on the Cardinals right now. So I feel I also have a little bit of Homer creeping out on me right now. But the Cardinals, I'm I'm buying everything Cardinals right now. But at the same time, I really like what the Bengals are doing. Do you have any sort of prediction as to how you think this game will play out? I have the Cardinals with an edge. I see a type of game. I can see almost a mirror image of the type of game that they had against the Seahawks last week. Just the way they've been playing, it seems to be the blueprint. They play well to start the game. They can let teams back in, especially good teams, and then pull away late. How do you see this game playing out ultimately?
I'm with you on that. I'm really torn on this game. Before the season, I had this as a loss for the Bengals. Going into last week, I had this still as a loss. I had this being their first loss. If it were in the afternoon or in Cincinnati, I'd have a lot better feeling about it. But that being said, I almost feel like the loss that the Bengals just had on Monday night is actually going to be a wake-up call, especially with as furious as Dalton got about the J.J. Watt comments, which I think he got. I think he overreacted about those. But for whatever reason, it certainly got him angry. And if that anger results in him playing better, I think that's a good thing for the Bengals. So with as bad as they played on Monday night, I'm actually now leaning towards the Bengals because I think it's going to be a bounce-back game for them. I'm not confident about that, but I will say in an entertaining 37-34 game that the Bengals pull it out. But
All right.
I'm not going to bet on that.
All right. Well, Scott, I really appreciate the time late on a Friday night. Is I'm recording here West Coast. It's around 8:30, and he's in the wee hours of the night after it's quiet and probably sitting by himself somewhere in his house. But Scott, tell us. I mean, how can our listeners follow? Obviously, Cincy Jungle is the place to go. If they sign up, is there any sort of wait period to be able to participate in the threads? Of course, respectfully, Cardinals fans, we are guests over there, so we shouldn't go over there causing trouble. Just a little bit of trouble, not too much trouble.
Just friendly trouble.
Yes,
sure.
Friendly trouble.
I think it is a two-day wait period. I'm not positive on that, simply because I've never tried myself. But I think it is like most of the SB Nation sites. I think there is a 1 or 2 day wait period to get in on the comments. But yeah, certainly plenty of stuff over there about the matchup this week, especially covering the Carson Palmer and Jermaine Gresham angle as well.
All right. Well, Revenge of the Birds Radio fans, thank you for listening. This has been a great interview with Scott Bantel over at Cincy Jungle. Make sure you head over to cincyjungle.com. Check out what they got. Scott's got great stuff over there, and I appreciate the visit with him. And I hope, and I say this to a lot of people, but I do. I hope we can do this again in February because that's good news for everyone involved.
I tell you, can you imagine 2 weeks of coverage of these stories? Man,
oh my gosh, yes. Carson
they would bury these into the ground.
Maybe Carson would say something else a little bit more, just a little bit more. No, but he wouldn't. Carson.
Maybe they can get him and Mike Brown up on the same stage together for
that would be great. All right. Well, Scott, thank you for your time. That'll wrap up Revenge of the Birds Radio, the preview show. We will be back. We'll record Seth Cox and I will record Tuesday night for our All Cardinals show. Wrapping up and covering hopefully what is an Arizona Cardinals victory on Sunday Night Football for the second week in a row. Thanks, Scott. Have a good night, and good night, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/revengeofthebirds.